It's wonderful to be with you all this evening, as it is for you. I hope that you have a beverage of choice with you so that you can stay engaged. Um, I am coming to you from Colorado in the United States. I live on Ute land, the Native American tribe, and in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. I am a spiritual director. So I practice accompanying people in their life with God, and I am a spiritual director with children at a homeless facility for families. So it is called Haven House, and I've been there for about 8 years. And COVID, of course, has put quite a wrinkle in accompanying children at this time in various phases of lockdown and masking and everything. And even trying spiritual direction over Zoom with children, which has its own challenges and hilarities. But I accompany children in their life with God at Haven House. I'd like to share a PowerPoint presentation with you, kind of as we step into this topic of listening, coming alongside and learning to listen with children. And this PowerPoint will be available to you. So afterwards, you will get it. So no, you don't have to frantically write things down. You will have it to use as is most helpful to you. So let me start by sharing my screen. And every time I do this and it works, it feels like a miracle, and I should like build an altar of gratitude or something. But here we go. Our topic today is going to be learning to have spiritual conversations with children. And I want to invite you to do a couple things. So the invitation on the front end is to have somewhere in your space where you can write some things down. What is stirring in you? What resonates with you? What do you say? Oh, yes, this is, yes. Write that down so that you can savor that. And then also notice, what do you feel some resistance to? Like, whoa, I don't know how I feel about that. Or I know I feel very strongly about that. And write some of those resistances down. From those might come some questions that you might have at the end. And for certain, both a resonance and a resistance is an invitation from God to you to deeper conversation. So just to have that God is saying, hey, let's talk a little bit about this. And so just listening for those over here on this place. Now I'm going to invite you to kind of a process or a listening lens of simultaneity. Such a fun, huge word that I'd like for you to be listening and engaging today from the point of view of the children that you accompany. So the children that are in your life, the children that you know, the little faces that come to mind from that perspective. And then also the simultaneity, your own childhood self. So we know from lots and lots of human development, our growing understanding. And long before that, Jesuit Karl Rahner had said that we don't switch developmental levels spiritually. We don't move from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. We actually bring them all with us into where we are right now. So your spiritual experiences when you were a child are still with you. Your spiritual experiences when you were a youth are still with you. An adolescent are still with you. A young adult is still with you. And so I'd like to invite you to listen, both for the children in your life and the child within you, your own little childhood self. So as we begin, I'd like to share a quote with you from Douglas Steere. Steere says, "To listen another's soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery." Okay, so let's begin there. to listen another soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery may be almost the greatest service that any human being performs for another. So I'm inviting you today to entertain, to explore the idea of listening a child's soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery. Every human person enters the world looking, reaching, desiring, aching, longing for connection. We human beings are wired for connection. We long to connect with other human beings. We long to connect with the world around us. One of the things that we're learning about children's consciousness, we've often said, which is why we've often said that children's consciousness is limited. And which is why we sort of had particular models of Sunday school throughout time, throughout the church, and ways of thinking about children, is we thought that their consciousness was emerging and was quite narrow, but we were wrong, as we've discovered. In fact, we're learning a lot about being wrong these days, aren't we? What we know now is that children's consciousness is expansive. We adults have narrowed our consciousness, but children are connecting with everything. I remember being in the parking lot of a supermarket when my children were very young, and I was putting one in to the car seat. And I looked over, and the other one, who was supposed to be, the rule was keep your hand on the car, right? So that we don't, anyway, I looked over and they were licking the wheel well of the car. And of course I freaked out, and, I was thinking, but that is an example of that expansive consciousness. Children are connecting, bringing in information and experience with everything, even the wheel well of my car. So they are desiring, longing, aching for connection with everything, very expansive. And that includes this longing, reaching, desiring, aching for connection with the divine as well. So what does that look like? Well, there are 4 elements, and every system of spiritual formation has different elements. These are the ones that resonate with me. These are the ones I have discovered and that I teach from, and you might have different ones. And you might come from a place where different ones shape and form your thinking. But for me, there are 4 elements for the spiritual formation of every human being. And let me just say, everyone gets a spiritual formation. Everyone. The first is God's self, that God has given God's self to every human being. Every human being. That goodness and beauty and truth is just lavished everywhere for everyone. The second is life. An element for our spiritual formation is the very life that we're living right now. Children who are experiencing COVID right now, that is part of their spiritual formation. The third is a vision of the way to live. And for Christians, that's Jesus. Jesus shows us how to live. And then there are spiritual practices. Spiritual practices can be awareness, mindfulness, learning the scripture. They can be prayer. For some children, I don't know if you all have this in the UK, but trampolines. I can't tell you how many children talk about experiencing God while jumping on a trampoline. So jumping on a trampoline for children can be a spiritual practice. So these 4 things, God's lavish giving of God's self, the very life that we're living, a vision of the way to live, which for Christians is Jesus, and spiritual practices, those all come together and they spiritually form us. Now for children, this is, you cannot even imagine how many hours it took me to put this little image together. I'm so technically inept. Marvel at it, would you? Children have all the dimensions of their person. And this way of thinking comes from Christian philosopher Dallas Willard, if you're interested in his book, Renovation of the Heart. All the dimensions of the person for children. So mind, thoughts, and feelings, social context, that includes family, friends, community, body, personal power package, and spirit, which is heart, will, where that of God resides, the center of the person. For children, all these dimensions of the self have not yet split. So in adults, we split the self. We're leading with one and less with the other. We might be stuffing down our thoughts and feelings as an adolescent in order to follow our social context. But for children, all of these are in sync. All of these are still working together. So when we talk about spiritual experience, we have to include body. We have to include social context. We have to include thoughts, feelings, and we have to include spirit, because the child's consciousness is so expansive. So the old way of sitting and, answering questions or doing curriculum, that leaves out, you can see, particular dimensions of the person. Children's consciousness is so expansive, they need them all. So what does that have to do with learning to listen? Well, Trevor Hudson, who is a South African pastor and spiritual director, says that we often ask for the gift of tongues when it might be more helpful to ask for the gift of ears. You see, that top element is in spiritual formation. Those 4 elements, that first element that God gives, God's self, to all of humanity, that is the primary place of children's spiritual formation. They are having God experiences right now, whether we are aware of it or not. They are having it when they are having interactions at school. They're having God experiences when they jump on the trampoline. They are having God experiences all the time. And we need to, as adults, ask for the gift of ears rather than the gift of tongues if we want to accompany them. So I'll try to mind the time. There are 2 movements in listening with children. And when we are listening with children, and I mean when we are listening to them, if they're our own children as we're cooking dinner together, whether we are listening to a child in the car park, whether they are playing outside and we're listening to children, there are always 2 movements to being able to hear their spiritual experience. The first is to recognize. So making space for the child to recognize their own voice and the voice of God who longed them into being. And when I say voice, I really mean something like movement or presence, because it may not be audible, it may not be words of any kind, or even, in fact, for children, it's less words and it's more feeling and wondering. And then the second movement is to respond. We make space for the child to respond to who and what they recognize. So if one thing I want you to be sure and hear today is recognize and respond. All spiritual conversations will have these 2 movements, whether that you're having them with your 90-year-old grandmother, or whether you're having them with a 7-year-old kid who lives down the block from you. They will be conversations around recognize and respond. So what is it that we are recognizing? What does that look like for children? And so let me use some language that was given to me by a group of 13-year-old boys. So I was sitting in this group of 13-year-old boys, and I was trying to explain to them about goodness being God's lavish love for them, and every experience of beauty being God's lavish love for them. And when they knew something was true and authentic and real, being God's lavish love for them, and awe and wonder. I'm trying to explain this to them, and they say to me, Lacy, it's like when you lose your phone and your computer can ping your phone and help you to find it. I was like, that's it. That's exactly what it's like. So all of these wonderful transcendent experiences, goodness, beauty, truth, wonder, awe, all ping our soul. They ping our spirit, something within us that says, I have been created for divine human connection. It is as if there is a homing signal, a beacon. I live as I said, in the mountains of Western Colorado. If you come and visit me, you can walk out on my back deck and see a 14,000-foot peak, just right off the deck. No, every person that has come to see me, immediately when they see Mount Snuffles, that's the name of it. So funny to every child I know. When they see Mount Snuffles, they will always put their shoulders back, open up their body almost to take it in. Oh, that is an experience of awe. They didn't choose it. It is autonomic. Oh, and that homing signal pings, ping. And somehow we know in that moment we were made for divine human connection. I was made for this. I was made for this. I was made for this. And so these pings, God has just lavishly thrown them around our world. They're literally everywhere. So let's talk about the three primary pings. When I'm sitting with children, I often use a metaphor of fingerprint. So I say, truth, beauty, and goodness are God's fingerprints in the world. I wonder where you have noticed God's fingerprints. And sometimes we'll ink up their fingerprints and put them on something. And I'll listen for the stories that they tell. Can you tell me a story about goodness? Can you tell me a story about beauty? Can you tell me a story about truth? So goodness, one of those pings, is whatever leads to human flourishing. Do you have a memory or experience of goodness of when you were a child? That is a ping. That is the homing signal ringing in you. Beauty. Beauty is, as again, philosopher Dallas Willard said, goodness made alive to the senses. So you can see this kid that's my youngest child, 17 years ago, eating chocolate cake. And they have that chocolate cake is up the nose. If you could see the other ear, there's chocolate cake in the ear. There is tasting the chocolate cake. This child is tasting goodness alive to her senses. And that's what beauty is, a butterfly on a flower. Beauty is goodness alive to our senses. And children have experiences of this kind of beauty. And that is when they experience God, that pinging, that homing signal takes off. Truth is whatever in fact is real. I use this picture of a barn because I was sort of wrestling with this in our world of relativism. What is truth? We're all asking this question right now. What is truth? What is truth? What is truth? And we had just a hailstorm where big chunks of ice had just demolished the garden, the greenhouse. But when I went out to the barn was still holding steady. And I had this sense of, oh yes, that's what truth is. Truth is whatever holds when everything else has been decimated. So if we wanted to have conversations with children right now around truth, we would ask them, okay, in this time of COVID, what is holding? What is still there when lots of things have been decimated? I had a child tell me recently that I don't know if you have this cereal Cheerios. Do you all have Cheerios? It's like a little oat circle. One child, their example of what truth was, what is holding, was Cheerios, because they were having them every morning through the pandemic. And while that for me sounds like its own special circle of hell, for this child, it was continuity and safety. When so many things were changing, school, can't go to school, going to school, family members sick, Cheerios every morning was a ping of God's love for them. Simple, round oat, bland, tasteless cereal was where they were encountering God. So let me ask you, what held as you reflect on your own childhood self? What was true? There are other pings, though. There is wonder, mystery, awe, woven threads of meaning, tears. Tears are always a ping for us. They heighten awareness for our longing for presence, especially when we are children. Whenever a child experiences pain or hurt or tears, they always look to the one who provides safety for them. And that's an invitation for them to come to God. The other place there are pings are in the life of a child. And right now, we are understanding that life is difficult, but the child is loved. That's one of the things that we can help them to hear. These are losses that children and teens experience. All of these losses, I'm sure that the children that you accompany and your own childhood self could name. So there are expressions of loss, children playing out the story, acting out strong feelings, withdrawal, existential questions, stirring longings. These are all expressions of loss, and God can be found, those pings can be found in each of these by simple recognize and respond. So I want to pause and give you an opportunity to go into breakout rooms and answer some of these questions. Tell about a time when you were wholly listened to. So when is a time in your life that you were completely listened to, and how did it feel? Can you tell about an experience of one of the pings when you were a child? One of my pings is an experience. My grandparents owned something like a deli. So it was like a little convenience store, but you could also go in there and get sandwiches. And I was about 5 years old, and I loved being there and helping out. And I'm sure you don't have this, but a pimento cheese sandwich, which is like cream cheese and pimentos and paprika. And I would eat a pimento cheese sandwich and drink a Dr. Pepper with a blind man named Blondie Duncan almost every day. And that is a place, he would ask me questions like I was running my grandparents' store. And that was a place where I felt the ping of God in this man who just was a listening ear. He would say, so what have you done today? Are you keeping the grandparents in? And just having these gentle, kind conversations with me shaped what I believed about God. And it helped me to connect. So what might it look like to be a listening partner to children in your own social context? What might that look like? So in order to answer that question, gentle listening looks like mirroring, noticing words that are, or images that are weighty. It's noticing contrast, similarities, woven threads of meaning, like paraphrasing, like, are you saying? and helping a child to hear themselves. But as we know, children don't always necessarily communicate with words. So it also involves a gentle seeing. So tuning in what's happening in their bodies, taking the body elsewhere to notice what catches their attention. I think one of the most wonderful things that we can do with children right now is take them on a nature walk and invite them to notice what's catching their attention. Studies tell us that the places that children report most feeling God's presence is in nature. Notice the dance of hiddenness versus being seen. So is there something that you are noticing that a child is hiding, but longs to be expressed? And then softening your seeing. What are you seeing that's sort of at the edge? And then asking yourself the question, what does God see? How does God see this child? So a spiritual conversation with a child might sound like this. I wonder in the last week where you have encountered something that's good or beautiful. Can you tell me that story? And then as the child is telling you the story, you might ask some questions that open that story up a bit. I wonder what that was like for you. So you're sort of keeping your divine curiosity hot. I wonder what that was like for you. How did you feel about it? Would you like to draw me a picture? I would love to see what that looked like. So asking those questions that sort of stir up that conversation, that's the recognize piece. And then the respond, I wonder what you would like to do or say about that wonderful experience. Would you like to say thank you to God? Would you like to go find the person who maybe acted in kindness towards you and tell them thank you? Would you like to draw a picture? Would you like to pray? How would you like to respond? And that two movements, recognize and respond. And you can be a listening partner to a child. You don't have to be a spiritual director. You can, again, do that in a car park. You can do that when you pass each other in the supermarket. You can have that listening conversation at any time, So we're going to invite you to go in the breakout groups now and answer either one of three. So we're not in there very long. So one of three. Tell about a time when you were wholly listened to, like someone really dialed in. And mine is with this gentleman, Blondie Duncan. He was blind as well. How did that feel to you? Or tell an experience of one of the pings. So goodness, beauty, truth, wonder, awe, when you were a child. And what did you learn from it? And then, or what might it look like to be a listening partner to children in your social context? So dream a little bit. What might that look like for you? When I wrote the book, Spiritual Conversations with Children, when I first in the first pages of the book, I tell the story of Christopher. So I was a school teacher in inner city Rochester, New York. Which I don't know if you know much about that, but it's a pretty rough neighborhood. In fact, our cars were surrounded by 6 feet of razor wire, as was the school. So Christopher was not allowed to go and eat lunch with the other children anymore because of some behavioral struggles. So the principal decided it was a wonderful idea to have Christopher eat lunch with me every day, his teacher, much to his deep and terrible sadness. I was a brand new teacher. I had just got my master's in education. This was my first big teaching assignment. And so I was all out of ideas. I had no ideas, no wisdom. I was super tired. And so when Christopher would come and eat lunch with me, I didn't teach him. I didn't give him things to do. I just hoped that he wouldn't burn the building down with the two of us along with it. So I said, let's just be in this space together. And then I started to ask him some questions about goodness and beauty. Not really because there was anything fabulous about me, but more I just needed him to talk so that I could do other things. I wasn't even listening very well. But when Christopher began to share, I heard an inner life that was in him. And he had to eat lunch with me for the whole rest of the year. And this incident happened in October. So it's October all the way to June. And I noticed that Christopher's resiliency increased. Just listening. I taught him nothing. I just asked some questions and helped him notice what was good and beautiful in his life. And that sort of began my wonderings about spiritual conversations with children, where they could happen, what is the content, what happens deep within the child when when someone listens their soul into disclosure and discovery. And I found out it makes a big difference in their lives. One of the things that we were talking about while you were in your breakout room is that there's a difference between religious conversation and spiritual conversation. Spiritual conversation is about being present, fully present to the other. It's not about content. Religious conversations often are content heavy, and there's an expectation of content. Spiritual conversations are not. Remember, they're about connection. Do you see the image of the father's finger and the little infant curling its fingers around the father's finger? It is that intimate connection is what makes spiritual conversations. And whether those spiritual conversations are happening divine to human, human to human, parent to child, friend to friend, what makes them spiritual is that deep connection. Another thing that we were talking about is what the character of the connection that we share with one another is determined by the child. So if you are listening to a child who is 5 years old and a child who is 12 years old, the character of the connection is different. So a 5-year-old, their attention span is likely, not always, but likely to be shorter. They are likely to be more bodily. They will more show you than tell you. Because that right hemisphere of the brain is developing ahead of the left hemisphere, the younger the age of the child. For older children, their powers of articulation and they'll lean more on words. And so that sharing of spiritual conversation will happen more with words. For our differently abled, the children who are differently abled in our midst. I'm thinking of the many children that I sit with who are on the spectrum, where art can be a primary way of expression, where even the telling of the same story, the story that is their kind of the topic that is their current fixation, is part of connection. That's why content is not as important, because it is that connection, spiritual connection, that matters. So let me pause. I've given you lots of words. Let me pause and invite you to ask some questions. What wonderings are in you? What did you find difficult as you've been taking this in and as you shared in conversation with one another?
I was sharing in my group that I've just started mentoring an 8-year-old girl, and it's very new and it's very fresh for me and for her. And I just would like to say that I've been very challenged in a good way this evening. I have absolutely drawn little love hearts around listening a child's soul. In the early days of this mentoring relationship, and I'm hoping that it will continue for months and months rather than weeks as it's just been at the moment. It's being sensitive to the child and giving that child an opportunity to listen to their own voice and to the things that you've shared, Lacy. But I've been very challenged about deeper listening and deeper listening and deeper listening, and I feel that that's where I need to go. Just, I don't know if there's anything you can suggest about deeper listening, except maybe me shutting up. I don't know.
Thank you. Just as we more deeply listen to children, deeper listening, a couple of things are at play. One is realizing that when we are in a listening conversation, we adults have all the power. And so shifting the power to the child helps open that conversation up, letting them choose what they'd like to talk about. In the book, I use Leanne Hadley has this wonderful little practice where you draw random symbols on stones. And then you invite a child to pick 3 stones that tell 3 stories of goodness, beauty, truth, wonder, awe, tears. And you say, can you tell me 3 stories? So they get to pick the stones, and the stones are nothing. The stones are just a way to project, kind of to park their story and their feeling, to project it. It just gives them something to lay it upon. So they pick their rocks, and then they tell you their 3 stories. And when they tell you their stories, the invitation is to thicken the narrative. And what does that do? What does thicken the narrative mean? I think we're going over time. You have to give me a wave if we're you guys need to go to bed. Because I come from
a tradition. For at least 20 minutes, Lacy.
Okay. So when I say thank you for your grace, when I say thicken the narrative, what we're doing is we're laying down a neurological footprint in the brain. So, and this preps the child's mind. It actually literally, as Paul says, we're being transformed by the renewing of the mind. So if a child, for example, says, I say, can you pick 3 stones about an experience of goodness, beauty, and when I say truth, I mean what was real that happened to you this week. They pick 3 stones and they tell me, okay, this one, let me tell you this story, Lacy. So when I was out on the trampoline today, so the little place that has that I go to, Haven House, has some playground equipment. So when I was out on the playground and I was playing today, I was thinking about what happened at school, and I punched this kid and this happened. But then when I was on the swing and I was swinging, I felt the wind in my hair and on my face. And I just felt in my heart like it was I'm going to be okay. This is going to be okay. So how do we thicken the narrative? I repeat it back to them. Okay, what do you mean it's going to be okay? Well, I mean, when I'm not worried and I'm not afraid and I'm not super happy, but I'm just like this, Lacy, I'm going to be okay. So I say, does be okay have a color to it? What color is be okay? They say to me, well, it's not really kind of bright pink or purple. It's more like this blue, like the color of the water, like behind Gary's head. I'm looking at Gary here, and he's got water in his picture. It's like that kind of blue. And I say, oh, it's like the blue of the ocean. And if I happen to have crayons or watercolors or pencils, I say, I wonder if you could draw me a picture of what that color blue, could you pick it out for me? And so they color a picture of what that feels like. And then I might savor it even further. I said, is there an animal that reminds you of what be okay is like? Well, let me think about that. It's not going to be my cat, because my cat keeps scratching me. That's not be okay. But it might be, there's this mangy dog that comes up whenever I go outside. And that dog makes me feel like right here, like everything is going to be okay. So I say, well, would you add that dog, draw that dog in the picture? Okay. So what am I doing when I'm doing that? I'm laying down a neurological footprint of God's goodness to this child. and of the sense of being okay. Now when they see blue and when they see that dog, their mind is going to come back around to this. And that rut of be okay is being formed in the brain. So can you see how it creates resiliency, but also it shapes their picture of God? As they learn this, be okay is something of the way that they experience God for a couple of reasons. One, in me as a presence who is listening to them. And one in, we talk about how God's fingerprints are these goodness, beauty, and truth. So maybe they tell a story about how the truth story is a story about how in the pandemic that they haven't been able to see their friends and they feel very lonely and very sad. And so I say, can you tell me a little bit about lonely? And I become the listening presence to them, listening, deeply listening to what is stirring in them about their loneliness. And I maybe ask a question if they have God language. So they already use God language. So I wonder, how was God with you when you were lonely? Now we as listeners will have to check our own soul around this. Are we open enough to hear them say, actually, I didn't feel God at all, without trying to fix them, but just listening? Or they may say, well, I felt God was with me. Children experience God a lot, by the way, in their pets. Pets are, so important to how children experience God. So I felt God every time my cat jumped up on the end of my bed and I cried into her fur. He said, okay, what was that like? I wonder if you'd like to draw a picture of that. Does it have a color? Again, you're laying down that neurological footprint of God was with you. I want to share my last couple of slides. It's true, I'm going to confess to you, I have a little PowerPoint obsession, so I appreciate your kindness. So I just want to remind you of these two movements in listening with children. Did you hear them as I explained some of those stories? Recognize, you make space for the child to recognize their own voice, the voice of the God who longed them into being, and respond. Make space for the child to respond to who and what they recognize. I want to show you super quickly two little tools that I like to use for response. And these are for children who have God language. These are prayer beads, and I tell you how to make both of these in the book and on my website if you just want to go there and get it there as well. These are simple beads and a cross. And for children who don't come from Christian context, I still want them not to have the cross. I have another set that just has like a circle, some that has a rock here, because I want to not push a religious conversation, but have a spiritual conversation that might lead to a religious conversation, but I'm not going to push one before the other. Does that make some sense? So we have these beads and I invite them. These are prayer beads. I tell them how to use them. We sometimes make them together. I've had children love to make these and the children that I work with and carry them around in their pocket, in their backpack. So as they move the beads this way, this is a responding tool. They are telling God what they just told me. So they're praying. So God, COVID has been so very difficult. I miss my friends. They've moved on without me, it seems, and I'm by myself, and I don't like my parents, and my little brother is a schmuck. So maybe all those things that they are actually feeling, they do all the talking. And then they put this piece in their hand, and they take 3 deep breaths. And the 3 deep breaths do a couple things. The deep breathing wakes up the part of the brain, the anterior cingulate, where we store our God experiences. So 3 deep breaths, deep breathing always wakes that up. So if you are ever in church or you're teaching and someone's yawning, that actually wakes that part of the brain up. That's a good sign, not a bad sign. So take 3 deep breaths after they have talked to God, and now they're going to move the beads in the opposite direction and listen. What do you hear God say to you? just in the quietness of your heart. And I often remind, you might not hear God in words. You might hear God in a shared feeling, in a picture, in a song. What do you hear God say? And then I invite them, if you like, you can share that with me, because we want to be a witness to what their experience, but you don't have to. So that love prayer beads. The other, this is a prayer labyrinth, and this is just made out of felted wool, but you can just draw it on a piece of paper. I just did a webinar, an Advent webinar for Renovaré. If you want to go look at it on Renovaré's site, where I teach you how to draw one for Advent. But if you want to go to renovaré.org, you can see one. But again, the labyrinth is a way to pray. So we talk with God all the way in. We tell God about those experiences that we're having, our strong feelings, just as we move our finger. And then when we get to the middle, we take those 3 deep breaths that wake up our interior cingulate, that ground us in our own experience. And then on the way out, now we listen. And the first time I introduced this, I thought that the child would do it once, because my example was I only did it once. But to my surprise, they wanted to have like this ongoing conversation with God. So they did it again. And I just sat there looking stupid, because I didn't expect them to continue to talk with God in that way. So expect the unexpected. Okay, last PowerPoints. You all are hanging in there so well. I hope you reward yourself with chocolate afterwards. Research tells us that there are 3 things we can do that communicate love to a child. And can I just tell you that your attentive, loving, safe presence shapes that child's picture of God, whether you ever use God language. What they believe about God is shaped by the loving people, or is shaped by the people who have authority in their lives, loving or not. And so when you have a spiritual conversation with a child, when you have generous listening until there are no more words and silence arrives, so they get to talk until they have no words left. For some children, that will be a short conversation. For some children, you'll need to bring a snack. So, and just depending on how verbal they are and how much they have to share. A really helpful acronym, I think, for what true presence and listening looks like is BODY. Is your body facing them and open? So is your electronic out of your hand? Are you facing them? Are your arms crossed? The sense of an open, attentive presence. And the second is openness. So within you, are you open to hearing whatever they have to say? Ask yourself that question. I had one of my early experiences of Haven House of a child telling me, don't ever use God language. Don't ever use God's name with me again. I hate him. And upon further listening, the God that he hated was a God he should have hated. It was one that enabled his father to abuse their family. That was his picture of God. So are you open to hearing a hard thing? And then W, wonder. Can you wonder about what God is doing in their life? So here, that's one way we communicate love to children, one way that they receive it. The other is acknowledging. So after they have spoken to us and we've got our body there, we've got our openness, we've wondered, we say, so are you telling me that when you are on the swing set and the air flows through your hair and around your face, that you feel God with you? See, when we repeat back to them, we help them to hear themselves, and we also lay down another layer of neurological footprint in their brain. And then we encourage. We say, that is amazing that God would meet you while you are swinging, while you were sharpening, that God would meet you in your deep sadness when your dog died. I wonder, and here's the empowering piece, I wonder how God will meet you tomorrow. I wonder how God will meet you tomorrow. So you set up the expectation that God will listen to them. Any last wonderings, questions, pushback?
Lacy, I love the simplicity of when you said about the colour, because I have conversations and I've never ever thought about whatever the situation is going, what colour do you think that is? That is something so profound and so simple. And you kind of go, even that, if I can take that one thing and use that, but I've never ever thought about that. So I thought I was listening and I've been playing back, but I've never thought about actually that is a way of taking that a little bit deeper. So thank you for that, because that's blown me away, really, that bit.
Another question you can ask is, where do you feel that feeling in your body? So they say, oh, I'm so happy. I'm so excited. Oh, where is that in your body? Oh, because remember, all those dimensions of the self are together for the child. Or I'm super nervous. It's the first day of school. I feel a little bit sick. Okay, where is that in your body? I wonder if you can put your own hands on that part of you. Can you feel the warmth of your hands? Maybe God's hands are right there with you. Can you feel that? So body, so important.
Thank you.
Lacy, mine's not a question, but it's just a thank you, because I feel like everyone who works with children in any church context should listen to this, because I think when I look back on maybe my childhood, and I was privileged to have spiritual conversations with my family, but I don't think we ever did in church, because it was very knowledge based, and I think we still are at the risk of that happening again, and we have another generation who don't know how to connect with their soul. And I don't think I remember reading Soul Care, John Ortberg, when I was 18, and I remembered thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I had that or that was how to connect with it. So just a thank you, and I'll be reading the book and recommending it, so thank you.
It's so good to be with you. Thank you, Rachel.
I would really, really love the beads for myself. I think they're a wonderful idea, and I think that a lot of this we can use for ourselves and adults as well as the children, because if it starts with us, doesn't it? We need to kind of feel him in us so we can feel him in other people.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. The children at Haven House often make extra sets of beads. That'll be something that we do together, and they give them to the adults in their lives.
Oh wow, that's really lovely.
Yeah.
I think the labyrinth's a lovely idea. So a number of years ago, Lacy, we had a big kind of territorial event, and we did a children's venue, and we had a huge labyrinth on the floor, so it took up half the room. And just watching the children walking in and walking out was just amazing, because you have that expectation that there's going to be one child who's just going to think it's great and run in and run out. Just the moment was beautiful. So I've seen the labyrinth kind of really work well.
Yeah, we took an old white sheet, and some markers that were dying, and drew it out on this big sheet. And we take the sheet into Haven House during Advent and Lent, and invite them to walk the labyrinth, and they do with as much intentionality as I've seen adults walk the labyrinth. Just that, isn't it interesting how we just long for those spaces where we can be quiet and be with God, and when people create that for us, our souls soar. There was one other question that we talked about while everyone was in their breakout groups, and that was what about when you're with a child who, in having these really intense presence with one another, makes them jumpy. And sometimes that can be per a gender, like boys, but sometimes it's our differently abled brothers and sisters who that kind of intensive presence does not feel good to them. Well, I would want to introduce this idea of the third thing. I don't know if you all have this game called Jenga, but it's where you have those blocks and it's absolutely mindless. I carry it around with me in spiritual conversations all the time, because if someone, a child, particular gender, age, for whatever reason, I can tell that they are uncomfortable with this intensely being present to one another, I'll say, hey, you want to play a game? Well, yeah. So we get out Jenga, and our focus is on this third thing. And it lowers our anxiety in the child, and even in myself, because, you know, anxiety pings off of anxiety. So they're anxious, then I'm anxious because they're anxious. And pretty soon the conversation is just not happening. But as soon as we bring in that third thing, their anxiety goes down, my anxiety goes down, and a lovely conversation emerges. So that third thing can be go take a walk. If you have children and you've ever been in the car with them and you're focused on driving, and now is when they want to talk about the thing. Well, that's because the third thing has lowered their anxiety and they can have the conversation. So art projects, lots of conversations happen when people are cooking dinner together. Why? Because the third thing makes room for it. So have a little ideas for your third thing in your back pocket for when you have these conversations. Any last wonderings before I pray a blessing over you? And I wasn't kidding about the pudding recipe. You are welcome to email me any. It's that time of year. So in the last chapter of the book, I just wrote a little blessing for people who accompany children. And I'd love to bless you, to pray that over you today. Would that be all right? Can I invite you to get comfortable in your chair? So whatever feels comfortable in your chair. And what picture of God is one that's inviting to you? Can you close your eyes and hold that in your mind, your heart? Would you take 3 deep breaths, waking up your interior cingulate? Breathing in our mothering Father, the redeeming Son, and the enlivening Holy Spirit. May you experience children with a renewed heart. May you become increasingly aware of children and greet them in common places like the grocery store and the park. May your deepening sensitivity to childhood experiences change the way you think and live. May you encourage a child's life with God through listening to what is being spoken and to also what is being said. May your life become one of prayer for children as people who are on the margins of society. May you honor the God-given autonomy of children, taking special care not to manipulate or smother them. May you be granted the awe-inspiring opportunity to witness a child's life with God. Amen.
Lacy, thank you. Thank you. That's been an amazing evening. I don't know. I don't feel as though I can speak really, because it's just been, it has been beautiful. So thank you so much for that. There's so much to take in. I had things to say, announcements. I'm not going to say them because I don't want to spoil the moment. So, yeah, I just want to say thank you, and to everyone here, thank you for coming. Because I know, everyone's busy, different things are happening. So, yeah, just thank you so much for being here with us. So, Lacy, I just bless you for your ministry. Thank you. And do you know what? If we try some of those things, we'll be back telling you how we got on. Because it's lovely for you, isn't it, to hear that? And yeah, so thank you. Just to say to everyone, in February next year, we've got a day conference at William Booth College. It's called Reach. It's about reaching. How do we reach God for ourselves? How do we reach children in our communities? How do we help them reach out to God? So if you want any information on that, then please do tell us. But we will have a bookstall there, and this book's going to be on there because it's just lovely. It's just so lovely. And I did say to Lacy earlier, I said, I'm not a reader, but it's a really readable book. And I think there'll be something for everybody in that. So it'd be great to see some of you at the conference if you're able. And if you're not part of our Raise Facebook group and you'd like to be, because we've got loads of information on there, then please do join us to share stories. So even if from this evening, you just want to share your experience, then do that, because it encourages each other, doesn't it? So Lacy, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you too. Have a, for those in the UK, have a good last probably hour before you go to bed. Lacy, is it the start of your day? Is it?
It's afternoon.
It's afternoon. Okay. Yep. So have a good rest of the day. But thank you, everyone. God bless you, and we'll see you all soon.
Peace to you, friends. Bye-bye.
Thank you.